Good evening, all. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for coming back. Welcome to EDL 707, Using Data for School Improvement again. I think I told you this before, but I'm going to say it again, and I'll probably say it again and again. Jennifer, thank you. I think I hit record. Let me make sure. I am recording. Thanks for the reminder. I've said this to you before. I want to say it again, and I'm going to say it again and again. My intention in this course and the other ones that I teach to you all, if you keep coming back, is to infect your thinking. I'm going to do everything I can to make your brain hurt. As you know, from our conversations and the learning task and some of the feedback that I've given you, my goal is to do everything I can to try to get you to think from the leadership perspective. For those of you that were in the other class just now that we just finished up, some of the things I'm going to say to you here are repeat. I apologize. My goal is to help prepare you all to be successful when you actually get into those school leadership roles. And I know some of you are already there. But I want you to, and I'm giving you some feedback in the grading too, to think like a leader, think from behind the eyes and the ears and the mind, and most importantly, think from behind the heart of the leader. We got a ton of data to collect and to consider and use and communicate. And as you all know, there's more of it than we can get to. So we have to make very wise choices about which data we're going to spend our time and effort on. It's nice to just peruse it. It's sort of like window shopping, but at the end of the day, if we want real results to show up in the campuses that we work and with the children we're serving, we have to be very selective about what we're going to spend our time on. In relation from a technical perspective, I have 65 of you, I think, in this course and 45 in the other one, and then I'm monitoring about 70 interns in the process. Some of you are among that group. So I'm doing what I can to try to keep my grading timely. And I'd love to give you nice thoughts and paragraphs of feedback on your work. It's just not feasible for me to do that. But I'll ping at you some and give you some feedback when I feel like there's something I need for you, a little more out of you. Particularly the APA citation stuff. Some of you have been hearing from me, it's not quite right, it's not quite right. You know, week 1, week 2, I'm trying to coach you toward being more proficient in the citation piece, but my generosity has a finite limit. I think you've discovered now, I'm pretty sure you've discovered now, that all the work that you did in the learning tasks from week 1, now I've got them stored for you, and they're in the brain trust. You find that in the learning enhancements of week 2. All the learning task 1 responses are there, and the learning task 2 responses. So not only do you have to listen to my blathering? You know, I've sort of got a captive audience, but I'm giving you opportunity to peek into the brains of a bunch of really smart people. And we got some smart people in this class. And I think you'll see that the perspectives of those people are very helpful in helping both you and me grow ourselves as leaders. In relation to the concept of the data stuff, and we've been talking about the data process, the role of data in week 1. Week 2, we shift the conversation a little bit. But I think you all now are probably comfortable with the idea that the data really comes to us in sort of 2 different versions. There's the quantitative stuff that we can put numbers on. And then there's the qualitative stuff that doesn't measure so easily. And according to Peter Senge and his colleagues, that qualitative, he calls it the soft data. The qualitative stuff is the hardest to measure, but it may be the most important to our success and to our ability to accomplish what we need. So I think it was in the discussion forum, Rebecca mentioned the importance of time. She made a great point that it takes time to analyze the student data. And so we have to make very concrete decisions about what data we're going to spend our time on. Can you afford the time? If you're in an active PLC, or if you're working with a team, a grade level team, or with other colleagues, or even if you're just examining your own data from your own classroom. One of my dearest friends is a graduate of Texas A&M University. He got his degree in agriculture. But he said that he remembered the professor getting in a conversation one day about fertilizer, and one of the students raised his hand and said, how can you afford to fertilize? And the professor stopped and looked back at him. He said, how can you afford not to fertilize? And I think we can make the same application of that thought to the issue of data. We got to decide which data is quality enough to spend our time on. But if we do spend time on it, then it gives us a real actionable direction to try to affect some improvement either in the individual performance of a student or of a group of students, or if you're thinking like a leader, the performance of a campus or of your administrative team, or if you're a superintendent, which many of you will be at some point in time. What data do we look at that will give us the most bang for our buck as we try to improve this school district for this community? So the data comes to us in hard versions and soft versions. And as you know, sometimes we'll talk about this in the week that we're talking about data collection. But sometimes we artificially try to put non-quantifiable data into quantifiable boxes. It's all contrivances for the most part. But the whole purpose is for us to try to tease out trends that we can then build actionable steps toward, either actionable steps to maintain those trends if they're positive trends, or actionable steps to bring them under control and reverse them if necessary. A number of you have mentioned, as a result of some of the content that I fed to you, and I think this was Dr. Datnow, her comments in that podcast about the importance of data analysis training, and several of you commented that you have never been exposed to data analysis training. And part of what we're going through this term is meant to accomplish that. Certainly to be thinking about data from every different perspective that we possibly can. But one of the prompts that I gave you in the discussion forum was asking you to relate a time in your professional experience when you saw data used effectively. If you'll take a look at the responses of your classmates there, that's almost a data analysis training in itself. Some of them are very insightful and exemplary in the way that them and or their teams have decided to use the data, analyze it, and build action steps around it. Pretty powerful stuff there. I love the concept of collective wisdom. The issue of training, though, on that word, it's not a word that I'm not crazy about, because training seems to be something that you do to somebody or something. I mean, we train racehorses. I'm a former athletic coach. We train the athletes. We put them through a bunch of hoops and stuff in the interest of improving their individual and group performances. We train people to be air conditioner repair people. But I much prefer the idea or the concept of learning versus training, or educating versus training, because that implies a greater deal of engagement, involvement of the person on the receiving end of that process. And so that's one of the reasons that I've posted that prompt to you that I did in the discussion forum, because I felt like you all would gain a lot from reading the ideas that your classmates, and we got a lot of them, that put forward in that. Jennifer made a comment that really resonated with me in the discussion forum when she talked about being data rich but information poor. That's a great idea, a great thought. And I've, in the last 5 or 6 years, my wife and I have completely changed, as in way of analogy, we've completely changed the way we eat. And I've mentioned to several people when they've asked me about that, I've told them that I came to the conclusion that for 40 years I was extremely well fed but malnourished. And the same idea holds in Jennifer's thoughts, being data rich but information poor. So we have to be very thoughtful discerners of which data is worth our time. And even then, when we'll have a whole body of data that's worth our time, we still can't analyze and act on all of it. We have to decide which pieces are important enough for us and our team to use. The soft data stuff that Peter Seinke references, that's the stuff you and I collect, and several of you have made comments along these lines in the discussion forum. You and I collect that soft data, or that qualitative data. Rarely do we get it in concrete forms. We get it through our eyes and through our ears, in the conversations that we have in the hallway, in the cafeteria, through our attendance at the activities of the school. And we're constantly absorbing, sponging up that data. I'll give you a real example of that. One of my tours of duty was as a high school principal in the Austin area, Texas. And when Hurricanes Katrina and Rita hit the New Orleans area, we absorbed a pretty large number of students from the New Orleans area. I know I don't say that like you Louisianans, but we had a number of students that we brought into our campus and during that process. And I was standing lunch duty one day, and we had 3 lunches of about 800 students. And I was standing lunch duty one day. We had a little stage there. And one of the young ladies that was a transfer from New Orleans came up and stood next to me, and she engaged me in conversation. And I was asking her about her life and stuff. That tragedy was really just sad for so many of those students. But this young lady and I were standing there looking out across the 600 or 800 students having lunch. And she said, you know, that would never happen in my other school. And I said, what? I thought maybe she saw something going on out there that I didn't. And she said, look out there. She said, look at the way all the colors are mixed up. And I was used to that because I'd been the principal at campus. And our students of different races mixed and mingled very freely on the campus. And she said that would have never happened in my school in New Orleans. But that was a piece of soft data that was very good for me. It's good for me to hear. It was affirming for me to hear, but it was data that you couldn't really measure, but very helpful data for me to have to catalog. Let me move on here. On the data dives, those parts, those 2 pieces of our learning tasks that I give you each week, somebody else said hit record. Am I not recording? Let me hit the pause. I am recording. Can you tell I'm recording? Yeah, okay, thank you. Good deal. Identifying on the data dives, and I'm going to expose you to some different kinds of data. More of it than not is going to be student academic performance data, but not all of it, because as a school leader, you and I have to be very conscious, just like the example I gave you of the way students are interacting with each other in the cafeteria. That's important data, certainly not on the ACT or the SAT or your state standardized test, but it's important data for you and I to have the healthiest school or school system that we can. But On the data dives, I specifically ask you for the data that's disconcerting. And on those data dives, when I ask you for the data that you find most encouraging and the data you find most discomforting, I want you to think from behind the eyes of the leader that's responsible for that data. I mean, if it's state education data, then think like you're the commissioner of education in that state. If it's district data, then think like you're the superintendent. If it's campus data, think like you are the campus principal, the person that's responsible for that data and for doing something about that data. On the discomforting stuff, I know identifying problems is not rocket science. I actually call it the Carrie Jo syndrome. In my first principalship, we had a maintenance worker on the campus named Carrie Jo. And Carrie Jo thought it was part of her job assignment to show up in my office at 7:30 every morning and report some problems that she had identified. And then she would leave, as if her identifying the problem relieved her of any responsibility whatsoever of trying to do something about those problems. So identifying the problem was not rocket science. Figuring out what we're going to do about those problems, that's where it takes some real powerful leadership and some collaboration. And as you all know, before all that happens, is you got to have trust in one another in that process. On your interventions, when I'm asking you on those data dives for interventions, please, with that in mind, with those comments I just made in mind, if you think like you're the person responsible, then I ask you, what steps would you take? Try to be specific and concrete about it. If you say something is superfluous or generic as a school leader, I mean, for instance, if you're looking at student performance data in mathematics and you identify a group that's not doing well, and then I were to ask you, okay, as the leader of this campus, what steps would you take? And your response is something like, well, I try to make those scores go up. Well, hell yeah. But you didn't say anything. So try to be specific. And as you know now, I'm not looking for a particular right or wrong answer, because to quote Kung Fu, there are many right answers, grasshopper. But what I'm trying to do is get you to think about it and think behind the eyes of the school leader about what steps might I take to affect some improvement here. For the data dives, excuse me, my notes. For every job, and I'm also trying to prepare you for your future here. In this day and age, anytime you all apply for a superintendent job, if you apply for a campus principal job, and most of the assistant principal jobs that you apply for, they're going to stick as a data set in front of you and give you a little time to look at it, and then ask you some questions about what you found positive to speak to, what you found that's a little worrying to you, and how you might address those trouble spots. If they don't actually hand you that data set, you can be certain when you go in that job interview, they're going to ask you a question like this. We assume you've looked at the data for our campus. Tell us what you think and what you have concluded from looking at that data. So they're either going to hand it to you, or they're going to make that assumption that you've looked at that data. And that's a big hint for you too. If you apply for one of those jobs, if you want the job, you better take a look at the campus data. And as you all know, it's pretty free for the taking these days. View these data as if you're the leader and the person ultimately responsible for it. I can't say that enough to you. And on the topic of problems and challenges, and the fact that there are many right answers, grasshopper, complex problems defy simplistic solutions. And there are, for instance, if any of you were ever to come up with a system that would completely eliminate tardiness in high schools, you'll be famous and you'll be rich. There are 1,000 solutions to that problem. And even if you find one that works on a campus 1 year, the next year you try to use the same solution and it won't work. So complex problems defy simplistic solutions. So what you try to do is you craft the best solution that's doable for you at the time to try to impact an improvement in the situation. My lovely bride, some of you have heard me speak of Mo, my lovely bride of 42 years now. When I accepted my first principal appointment in a rural school about 20 years ago, I was completely overwhelmed. Completely overwhelmed. And could not get it all done. And then some 10, 12 years later, I had worked my way through up the escalator a little bit, and I was a principal of a huge high school campus, and one large enough that I had 9 assistant principals. And you guessed it, I was overwhelmed. And during that whole tenure, all those years that I was a principal, my lovely bride continued to bring me back, because I'd come home usually late in the evening, sometimes early in the morning, but she continually, she saw it better than I did. She continually said, "Nelson, if you'll take care of the people, they'll help you take care of the stuff." And as time went by, I got better at that. But several of you, I've seen in some of your comments, overwhelmed is the land that I've lived in for about 40 years of my career, I understand. And I know all the things that you got going on, and I know that I'm, as a professor, I'm giving you just more stuff to do. But I have the very best intentions for you, because we don't have enough good people that want to be school leaders. And God has blessed me with the opportunity to try to impact your thinking. And I'm going to do the best I can, because I want you to be successful. Not only for you, but for those thousands of children that you will touch that I will never have the opportunity to. On that topic, there are certain things that I highly recommend to you. One of my bosses about 15 years ago, it was one of my bosses when I was a large high school principal. She gathered us principals up in April one year, and you know what April is like at the schoolhouse. If it's full speed the rest of the year, April is like warp speed. And my boss told those of us on our principal team, the campuses in that feeder system, that she wanted all of us to develop a personal growth plan. And I was sitting there looking at her, and I was thinking, you have got to be kidding me. With all the stuff that we're trying to do and get done, and you're going to give us a homework assignment of developing a personal growth plan. And I was pissed, to say the least. But I got home and I got to thinking about it, and I thought, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to try to create something that's useful for me. And I did. And I'm now 15 years into it, and I don't have to do my personal growth plan anymore, but I do. And I post it publicly. You can find it on my website if you like, because there's some psychology behind that. And that is, if you make declarations very publicly about what your intentions are, then you're more likely to follow through. And so I continue to live off of a personal growth plan. I revise it every June for the coming year. And it changes from time to time, of course, because there are certain things that I want to focus my effort. I collect data on my personal undertakings, and there's things that I want to improve to make me better. A disclaimer, I'm going to skip that. Week 1. I want to comment about the week 1 content on the role of data. A lot of the data that we collect, particularly schools over the years, especially as they drifted away from being one-room schoolhouses and they become more and more metropolitan, more and larger and larger organizations, they take on the nature of bureaucracies, and one of the fundamental tendencies of bureaucracies is that they begin to they begin to live and breathe and behave in ways intended to maintain the bureaucracy. In the literature and in the empirical research on organizational behavior, there seems to be a tipping point at about 150. If you, for instance, if your church or your organization or your shooting club or your riding club or whatever you belong to, it tends to function as a very organic and interactional kind of thing, an organism. But when it gets to about 150, then it begins to take on bureaucratic kinds of natures where you begin putting rules and processes and procedures and protocols in place, either formally in writing, you codify it, or you adopt those things in an informal way. And the nature of the leadership in that bureaucracy tends to make decisions based on what's best for the bureaucracy and not necessarily what's best for the members of the organization. So most of you, not all of you, but most of you are working on campuses that are well above 150 in population. And most of you are working in school districts that are well above 150 employees. And so those bureaucracies tend to want to maintain the status quo so that the bureaucratic organization is not disrupted. It's very important for you to think about when you become a campus principal or a district superintendent about what processes you can put in place to empower people to take the action that they need to take at their work site in order to effect improvement and not just be followers of rules. One of the favorite superintendents that I ever worked for used to gather us up in summer, and all of us principals, and at the time, I don't know, there was 42 campuses, so there were 42 campus principals and however many assistant principals there were. But Tom used to gather us up every July when we come back from what little vacation we might have had. And he would make a point of saying, I did not hire you to enforce policy. I hired you to do what's right for kids. And if you do, I'll support you. Powerful message. But it's one that you and I can also send to the teachers that work with us, as well as the support staff that works with us, as well as the bus drivers and the cafeteria workers, all of that. Let me say this too, on the data dives and the Go Fish assignments. It's very interesting. Some of you are on the Go Fish, you're using some data from your particular school or your classroom, and yeah, fine, absolutely. Use this valuable time for stuff that's you can take advantage of and actually use. You're more than welcome to do that. I've decided I'm going to try to end each of our sessions during these Zoom sessions with just a few books that are connected to the topics of the week. And you can take it or leave it. I promise you I'm not ever going to recommend a book to you that hasn't been very impactful in my thinking and behavior. And so I'll just give you a few of these books for you to think about. I know you got plenty to read already, more to do than you can possibly get done. But at some point in time, if you develop your own personal growth plan, you're probably going to have, or you're going to want a list of sources that'll challenge your thinking in order to move you, in the words of the Chronicle of Narnia, onward and upward. Dr. Clayton Christensen, you saw the video on how you measure your life. Actually, I first became introduced to Dr. Christensen in a book that and he's a business guy, as you know, but he and some other colleagues wrote a book called, they wrote it in 2008, but they wrote a book called Disrupting Class. And those business guys, those business professors began taking a look at what was disrupting the field of education. And really, it turned out to be a very impactful work in our profession. A lot of people read it, and it's really excellent work. Obviously, you saw his TED Talk on how you measure your life. The book by the same title is even better. and I can highly recommend it to you. I've mentioned to you the soft data issue stuff by Peter Senge, and that's S-E-N-G. Mute your mic, please. Thank you. Peter Senge, S-E-N-G-E. He's the guy that talks about soft data and how important it is. But that was in a book titled Presence, an exploration of profound change in people, organizations, and society. It was written in 2005 by Senge and an MIT guy named Sharma. And actually the lady that ran the LBJ library at UT Austin, where I've worked for the last 14 years. Very, very good work on the moves that you and I can make by being fully present with the people that we work in and around in order to best accomplish the collective work that we need to try to get done. Okay, I'm going to shut up and answer your questions now. You can ask me questions about this course, the other course, if you're in that course, or you can ask me the question about the internship if you're not here. Problems of practice or personal questions, I don't know. Floor is yours. Fire away. Sounds like a song, doesn't it? Fire away. Let's see, who's that made the comment? It says Weber. I don't know if it's David or Karen. We got two Webers in the class. Seeing what others posted was a big help. I've done that with malice aforethought. I can promise you we got folks in these classes that are a hell of a lot smarter than I am. Other questions you got? If you have. Karen. Thank you, Karen. Going once. Oh, which I'm assuming the one I did spell was Peter Senge. It's S-E-N-G-E. Looks like singe, but it's Senge. I assume that's the one you're talking about. Other questions? If you care, you can also go to my website. I have a list of book recommendations there on my website, on a link there too. I get that question a lot. Why was the observation of the New Orleans school children helpful as the soft data? One of the things that was important to me as a campus principal, particularly when I was a principal of a high school, because really, high school kids, for all intents and purposes, are adults making their own decisions. And so the culture, the culture of any school campus is important. But in high schools in particular, the student leaders in those schools and the student subgroups in those schools have every bit as much to do with the well-being and the high functioning. I'm not talking about just academic. I'm talking about social interactional functioning of that. It's really a community. Or in some of those big ones, for instance, that high school I was a principal of, on that particular instance, that high school was larger in population than 75% of the towns in Texas. I mean, it was a monster. It was its own city. And so it was always very important to me to be, I call it dipsticking. Malcolm Gladwell calls it thin slicing. That's a book I should have recommended to you. In his book, Blink, Malcolm Gladwell, very good book, but it talks about the same thing, taking assessment of the data, the soft data, that gives you very key and telling information about the health and well-being of the organization. So when that young lady came up there and stood next to me and she shared that with me, it was affirming and confirming that we had a healthy interactional relationship between and among the racial subgroups of the students on our campus, and it was very diverse. In fact, on that particular campus, we were serving 41 home languages. So it was a very diverse campus. This is LaTanya, one of my Fort Bend friends. I was talking to Dr. Dupree last week, and Dr. Pattaville. Dr. Pattaville is one of my mentees. I don't know if he's he's your direct boss or not, but if you began before the fall of 18, you're only required to complete 200 hours. You're talking about the internship. If you began in this program, the EDL program, prior to August 2018, then you're required to take EDL 716 3 times. And you have to get 60 hours of internship activity during each of those classes. Although we credit you with a fourth 60 hours through your course involvement in the other courses, so that your total ends up being 240. Okay, but you get 60 hours of actual intern activity each time you take EDL 716. For those that entered the program in last August 2018 and after, you'll take it EDL 716 4 times, and you'll get 60 hours of internship each time for a total of 240. Let me finish. There was another question there. Can I complete observation hours with a principal in Louisiana while I'm out for spring? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Of course. LaTanya, any activity that you can engage in that you can connect to those ELCC leadership standards, yes. And actually, it's like on the interviews, I encourage people all the time, don't limit yourself just to the interviews that we put there, the school nurse, the principal, the school counselor. If you can get access to the transportation director in your district and bend her or his ear for an hour, it will do nothing but better prepare you to be a more effective campus leader when you got 18 or 20 or I guess the largest campus, I had 24 buses rolling up every morning and every afternoon. It'll help you. One of the things that I used to do with my leadership team, my assistant principals, is I would have, this is sort of connected to the PLC class, but once a month, I and my assistant principals would have a lunch together, and I'd get, Subway sandwiches or something brought in. But I would ask somebody from central office, a director, either a director of human resources or the director of transportation or the legal director or whatever. I'd ask them to come spend lunch with me and my assistant principals and operate off of what used to be David Letterman used to call the top 10 list. It was, it's kind of comical, but I would ask them, for instance, if it was a transportation director, I'd ask him if you would come spend lunch with me and my assistant principals and give us your top 10 list of things that you sure wish the damn principals understood about the transportation department. And so it was really turned out to be a great learning experience for the assistant principals and for myself. And it also created a very good working relationship between our campus and the central office, which was powerful. Let's see, Guy. Okay. Yep. He's responding to LaTanya. For those of you on the 60-hour thing, some of you are already acting as dean of students, or we've even got a couple of assistant principals. This semester, we've even got a person that's been named interim principal of a high school. And so, for instance, she will get her 60 hours in about a week as the interim principal of a high school. But if you're exclusively a classroom teacher, then it's a little more difficult to get those 60 hours. But if you're a department chair or an instructional coach, then a lot of the stuff that you're engaging in already is going to be creditable internship activity. Other questions if you got them?
Hi. I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing my internship as well, and my mentor has allowed me to take a lot of the trainings that I'm going to have to go through to be an administrator, such as the what is it, crisis intervention and all of that. All of that counts.
Yeah, absolutely. Good for your principal.
Okay.
Who's your principal?
Colette Torres. Talk
Oh,
to Miss Torres. Yeah. She's
You're-
allowed me to go
you're-
to everything.
You're in Killeen. That's
Yes.
home
Yes.
stomping grounds. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Great.
Thank you.
Guy, privately. Okay. Tanya, thanks. Okay. Cami, is the 60 hours required for MEDC ESL? No. Well, now, Cami, you're a CNI student, so I'm not I couldn't begin to tell you. I didn't even know CNI students had to have an internship. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. And Dr. Russ Perry, he has been the director of the MEDL program, but just last December, just this last month, they've also named him the interim director of the Med-C&I program as well. So if you all have to have an internship, I don't know if you do or not, but he'd be the guy to ask. I just don't know. Uh-oh, 2 in Killeen, Central Texas. Here we go. Other questions? Thank you all for making me smarter. I love being on your team. See you next time.
I just wanted to mention that I really like the format.
Oh.
That it's different, so it's kind of a breath of fresh air. Everything else has been good too. Every professor does it different, but I like kind of ingesting everything and then coming back at it. So I wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much. I was superintendent of 2 different school districts, and in one of them we started our own virtual school, and we ended up cornering about 1/3 of the virtual school market in Texas with our virtual school. And I think that's why LSU reached out to me when they told me that this program was becoming a fully online program, and asked if I'd be interested in joining the team, because I've had so much experience in the online environment. And for what it's worth, I know you don't care, you didn't ask, but I've taught pure face-to-face classes, and I love those. And when I was working on my doctorate, I would drive 100 miles on a Wednesday night, sit for 3 hours of class, and then drive 100 miles home. And yes, I fell asleep more than once trying to get home. But then I've also taught blended classes, and I've taught purely online. And actually, my preferred methodology is the blended. Although I get to see you all, I only get to see your face. I can't read your body language very well. And I can't see the way you cut your eyes over at the other students, because you're not cutting your eyes over at the other students. So I miss a lot of those soft data cues that you get in the face-to-face environment. But I very much, and I think I mentioned this to you before, I'm not trying to tell you what's right and what's wrong, because there's a ton of information out there, and you and I as effective leaders have to and need to absorb a lot of information, discern it, compare and contrast it, bounce it off of valued others who's thinking that we value, and then come to conclusions of what's important here for me. And even in crappy stuff, and I know I'm giving you some content that's kind of crappy, But even crappy stuff, you can find some pearl. You all have been to professional development sessions that you sit through 6 hours of it and that you hear one thing of value. Yes, it's a pearl. It's a pearl. But thank you, Aaron. Aaron, thanks for the kind words. Let's see. All righty. I'm gonna send us to bed. Well, I think I'll sit on my big chair with Mo and have a glass of wine, and then I'll go to bed. Have a good night, all.